So, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, isn't it? This thing called stress.
It really is.
It can sharpen our focus, yeah, drive us forward, but then if it tips over, it can become this heavy weight, potentially leading straight into depression. Today, we're going right into the heart of that connection. Stress and depression.
Really complex link.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And our mission for this deep dive is to kind of cut through some of that complexity, really try and nail down how stress acts as a trigger specifically in the brain, especially regarding brain chemistry.
Right.
Think of this as your express route, maybe, to understanding a really important issue. We've been digging into some insightful stuff, particularly excerpts from a book, Depression: The Predisposing Influence of Stress.
Very relevant source for this.
And the central idea that just keeps surfacing is that, okay, yes, stressful life events can spark or worsen depression. That seems clear.
It does.
But the real crux of the matter, it seems, lies in our brain's chemical response to that stress.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is how our brains react. So when we face a challenge, it kicks off this chain reaction. It releases key neurochemicals.
The big ones.
Yeah, norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin. These are just fundamental for regulating, well, everything from mood and energy to our general sense of well-being.
Okay.
Now, when we experience stress that feels manageable, something we think we can actually handle, our brain's response, it's generally healthy, it's adaptive.
So we gear up, deal with it, and then settle back down.
Precisely. We tackle the situation, and then our systems return to their normal state.
Yeah.
Baseline.
And this is where it gets really interesting, I think, because the book draws a very clear line between that kind of manageable stress and the other kind, the kind where you feel completely, utterly at its mercy. What happens differently in the brain then?
Right. Well, when stress becomes prolonged, or it feels beyond our control, that perception is key, our brain's regulatory systems, they can just get overloaded.
Go work.
Exactly. Instead of that nice, balanced release and recovery, we can actually see a depletion of those vital neurotransmitters we mentioned, norepinephrine, dopamine, serotonin.
Do they get used up?
In a sense, yes. And the book suggests that this very depletion is a primary way stress can initiate or intensify depressive symptoms. It's almost like the brain's essential mood resources are being drained faster than they can be refilled.
Wow.
So a key takeaway here: chronic, uncontrollable stress can genuinely deplete these crucial brain chemicals, really upping the risk for depression.
So it's maybe less about just experiencing hard times and much more about whether we feel we have any sort of power, any agency to influence those times. That feeling of control seems absolutely central.
Precisely. The book really emphasizes the critical role of what psychologists call perceived behavioral control.
Okay, perceived control.
Yeah. When we believe we have some say in a stressful situation, even a little, it seems to help our brain maintain that crucial chemical balance we were just talking about. Well, we take action. Maybe we see some results, however small, and our neurochemistry tends to remain more stable. It doesn't go into that overdrive depletion state as easily.
But when that feeling of helplessness creeps in, that feeling like you're just being swept along by events.
That's when the brain's reaction can become, well, detrimental. The book explains that when stress is perceived as uncontrollable, the brain tries to compensate chemically.
Tries to fix it.
Kind of. Think of it like your body trying to crank up the volume when the signal's weak. The brain might release more of these chemicals initially, trying to compensate for that lack of control.
Oh, interesting.
But this can be unsustainable. It's like revving an engine too high for too long. It eventually leads toward burnout, depletion, and that increases our vulnerability to depression.
So feeling in control isn't just like a nice mental state to be in. It actively protects your brain chemistry.
That's a great way to put it. It actively buffers the negative impacts of stress on a chemical level.
It's still crucial, though, for us to remember, isn't it, that depression isn't just one thing. It's not monolithic. People's experiences can be so incredibly different.
Absolutely, and the book makes that very clear. This interplay between stress and depression is complex. It is definitely not a simple cause and effect.
Right.
Individual factors play a huge role. Things like our genetic makeup, our personal history with stress or trauma, the strength of our social support, friends, family.
Community.
Exactly. And even our cultural background. All these things can shape how stress ultimately impacts our mental well-being.
So what might be a major trigger for one person could be something another person handles with relatively more ease because of those background factors.
Precisely. And the book also touched on different types of stress we experience, didn't it? Not all stress is the same.
Yeah, it did.
Yes, it differentiates between transient stressors.
Yeah.
Those are the short-lived, acute things like maybe a sudden deadline or an argument. And then sustained stressors. These are the ongoing pressures that just persist over time. Chronic illness, financial worries, difficult relationships.
The long-haul stuff.
Exactly. And it just stands to reason, doesn't it?
Yeah.
These different kinds of stress would likely have varying impacts on both our brain chemistry and our behavior. A sudden shock is very different from that constant drip, drip, drip of chronic pressure.
We've talked about the different kinds of stress, and that brings up a really interesting point about how researchers actually study something this complex. I mean, this whole area must be incredibly challenging for researchers to really untangle. It can't be easy to pinpoint exactly how stress leads to depression in an individual.
You're absolutely right. It's notoriously difficult. The book highlights several key difficulties in researching this connection. For instance, retrospective studies.
Where they ask people to look back.
Yes, asking people to recall past stressful experiences. They're valuable, sure, but they can be affected by memory bias. Our current mood can really color how we remember past events. If you're depressed now, you might recall past stresses as being more severe.
That makes sense. And what about trying to study it as it happens, in real time?
Well, prospective studies, the ones that follow people over time, they face their own set of challenges. Accurately measuring how severe stress is for a particular individual and how it personally affects them, that's a huge hurdle.
Because stress is subjective?
Very much so. What one person finds intensely stressful, another might navigate with more resilience due to those individual factors we mentioned.
Right.
Then you have laboratory simulations. Researchers trying to induce stress in controlled settings.
Like giving someone a tricky math problem under pressure.
Exactly. But trying to replicate the multifaceted nature of real-world depression with all its deep emotional and physical symptoms by exposing people to relatively minor stressors in a lab, it often just falls short. It doesn't capture the complexity.
Yeah, I can see that. Misplacing your keys for 5 minutes isn't really going to compare to the profound impact of, say, losing someone close to you.
Not even close.
And speaking of those really significant events, the book really emphasized the strong connection between major life changes and depression.
Absolutely. Events like divorce, the death of a loved one, losing a job. These are strongly, consistently linked to an increased likelihood of developing depression.
But again, is it just the event itself?
Not solely, no. The key point the book makes is that it's the emotional weight these events carry, combined with that feeling of a lack of control over the situation or its consequences, that seems particularly significant. The perceived uncontrollability again.
That theme just keeps coming back. And the book mentioned that stress can play a role in different forms of depression, right? It's not just one type.
Yes, it notes that stress can be a precursor to both what's sometimes called reactive depression, the kind that's pretty clearly triggered by external events, and also endogenous depression, which often seems to have a stronger biological or genetic basis, maybe less of an obvious external trigger.
Interesting.
But, and this is important, while the link between stress and reactive depression might seem more direct, even in cases that look more endogenous, prior or ongoing stress could still be a contributing factor, making someone more vulnerable in the first place. Stress can lower the threshold.
Okay, this is all incredibly insightful, really helps frame the issue. But I know what's probably on many people's minds right now. It's that fundamental question. Why don't all of us, who experience really stressful times, end up becoming depressed? What makes the difference?
That is a crucial question, and the book addresses it directly. The answer really lies in those individual differences we talked about earlier.
Resilience factors.
Exactly. Our capacity to cope with stress varies enormously. Our genetic predispositions play a part, the strength of our social support systems that buffer we mentioned, and, importantly, our brain's own natural ability to bounce back from stressful events and maintain its chemical balance.
Neurochemical resilience.
Neurochemical resilience, exactly. It's a great term for it. Not everyone's brain chemistry reacts identically or recovers at the same rate, even when facing similar levels of stress.
Okay. And what about those smaller things? The everyday frustrations, the daily grind. Can they really add up? Can those minor daily hassles actually contribute to depression?
The book suggests, yes, they certainly can. Especially, again, if those hassles feel uncontrollable or if we lack effective ways to cope with them day in, day out.
So it's the accumulation.
It's that cumulative effect. Think of it like small drips of water eventually filling a bucket. These small, persistent stressors can wear us down over time, chip away at our resources, and contribute to an increased feeling of being overwhelmed, hopeless, and potentially, yes, to depression.
Right. Which leads to another question I'm sure many are pondering. If stress can deplete those vital brain chemicals like serotonin and dopamine, is it possible for that to be reversed? Can the brain actually recover from that depletion?
That's a key question for treatment, obviously. The book offers a hopeful but also cautious answer.
Okay.
It indicates that the brain does have a capacity to adapt over time. It's plastic. It can potentially increase the activity of certain enzymes that help rebuild or restore those neurotransmitter levels.
So it can bounce back.
It can try. However, if this adaptive process itself breaks down, or if the system simply becomes too overwhelmed by chronic or particularly severe stress, then it can lead to persistent changes, persistent depressive symptoms. So it highlights the brain's amazing ability to adapt, but also acknowledges its limits.
And one final thought on the research itself. With all these complexities we've discussed, the subjectivity, the measurement issues, how much confidence should we really place in these studies linking stress and depression? Is the evidence generally considered strong?
The book emphasizes that while these studies absolutely offer valuable insights, and they strongly suggest a clear connection, we also need to be aware of their inherent limitations. As we discussed, there are challenges with self-reporting, the difficulty in consistently defining and measuring stress, and just the sheer complexity of depression itself, which isn't one single condition.
Right.
So while the evidence is compelling and the link is widely accepted, it's important to approach it with a nuanced understanding. We know there's a relationship, but pinning down the exact mechanics for every person is still tricky.
Okay. So wrapping this up a bit, what does all of this mean for us, for you listening? What are some practical takeaways from this deep dive into the stress-depression connection?
Well, the book offers several key recommendations based on this understanding. Firstly, and perhaps most importantly, there's a significant emphasis on focusing on our coping mechanisms.
The things we can actually do.
Exactly. Enhancing our ability to feel some sense of control during stressful situations and actively developing effective coping strategies. Problem solving, seeking support, relaxation techniques, exercise. These can serve as really crucial preventative measures against stress-induced depression.
That makes perfect sense. Feeling empowered to act, even in small ways, can make a huge difference. What else does the book suggest?
Secondly, it really highlights the need for personalized approaches to intervention and treatment.
Right, because everyone's different.
Precisely. Given the variety in how depression manifests and the multiple factors contributing genetics, experience, type of stress treatments, really should be tailored to an individual's unique neurochemical profile, their psychological makeup, their life circumstances. A one-size-fits-all approach is just unlikely to be optimally effective.
And you mentioned social support earlier, the importance of having a supportive network.
Absolutely vital. The third point is about strengthening our social and environmental support systems. Having strong social connections, supportive family, friends, community groups. These act as significant buffers against the impact of stressful life events.
Like safety net.
Exactly. They provide emotional resources, practical help, perspective, all things that help us navigate challenges more effectively.
And looking forward, from a research standpoint, what does the book advocate for? Where should the science go?
It calls strongly for more longitudinal research.
Following people over long periods.
Yes. Studies that follow individuals over extended periods using precise measurements of both their stress exposure and tracking changes in their brain chemistry and function over time. This kind of long-term data is really essential if we want to clarify the complex cause and effect relationships more definitively.
Makes sense. And just for our everyday lives, day-to-day, any final piece of advice based on this?
I think a key one is don't underestimate the cumulative effect of minor stressors, those daily hassles we talked about.
Yeah.
Building resilience in our daily lives is crucial. This means things like maintaining healthy habits, practicing stress management techniques regularly, not just when we're overwhelmed, and actively cultivating a sense of control where possible in our daily routines. It's about minding the small stuff before it potentially builds into something bigger.
So if we really boil it all down, it sounds like depression isn't just about one single thing going wrong, not just brain chemistry, not just bad events.
Not at all.
It's this really intricate interplay between our brain chemistry, our behaviors, our thoughts, and the environment we're navigating.
Exactly. It's not simply a chemical imbalance, nor is it solely a reaction to difficult circumstances.
Yeah.
It's the complex interaction of all these factors. And understanding this relationship, as we've explored today, really does open up more effective pathways, both for preventing depression where possible and for developing more targeted, helpful treatments for those who are struggling.
This has been a truly illuminating deep dive. Really fascinating stuff. It definitely prompts you personally to consider how you deal with stress. So for you listening, maybe take a moment to think. What are your go-to strategies for coping? How do you build that everyday resilience we talked about? It's certainly something worth reflecting on after our conversation today. Thanks so much for joining us.